At the charity gala meant to celebrate her success, Juliana Voss, draped in gold silk and arrogance, laughed as her lover, Connor Hale, poured a full glass of wine over her husband's suit, the crimson liquid splashing across his chest like blood on dignity. The crowd gasped. She didn't flinch. She stepped forward, tilted her chin, and spat on him. The man who once sold his car to pay her mother's medical bills. The man she called boring, broke, and beneath her. Guests whispered, cameras flashed, and yet, Nathaniel Voss didn't raise his voice. He simply wiped his face, nodded once, and walked out of the ballroom with calm that unsettled everyone, more than fury ever could. Because no one, not even Juliana, knew the truth. The man they just humiliated wasn't poor. He was the invisible owner of Voss Global Holdings, worth $20 billion. But why did he let them mock him in public? Why had he hidden his fortune even from his own wife? And what could possibly make a man that calm when every other husband would have shattered the room? The late evening sun poured through the tall windows of the Voss residence, washing the living room in warm amber. Boxes stood half-packed near the doorway. Juliana Voss folded Nathaniel's shirts neatly, pausing to inhale the scent of his cologne like a woman wrapped in devotion. The room looked serene, like every photograph of a perfect American marriage. Laughter, teamwork, shared dreams. "Don't forget the navy suit," she said softly, sliding hangers across the rack. "The one with the subtle stripes. You'll need it for your presentation in D.C. Nathaniel smiled, that quiet, controlled smile he'd perfected over years. "Already packed," he replied, his voice calm, steady. His movements were precise, unhurried, every gesture deliberate. You'd think he was an ordinary husband preparing for another modest business trip. Juliana turned, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I still can't believe how patient you are, Nate," she whispered. "If I were you, I'd be so tired of my moods." "You underestimate how much I enjoy your chaos," he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers. It sounded romantic, and in that moment, it almost was. For a second, the illusion held. The laughter, the scent of lavender detergent, the quiet rhythm of a couple who'd weathered years together. Yet beneath the warmth, a silence coiled. The kind of silence that hides too much understanding. Juliana's phone buzzed. Her eyes flickered. She reached for it quickly, smiling faintly. "Work," she said, slipping it face down. "The campaign's killing me." Nathaniel said nothing. He adjusted his cufflinks, the ones she'd bought him 3 anniversaries ago, engraved with their initials, NV and JV. To anyone else, they'd symbolize devotion. To him, they were data points. The initials matched more than his name. They matched every encrypted trust fund, every offshore account she didn't know existed. He kissed her cheek, lingering just long enough to study her pulse beneath the skin. Fast, uneven. Lies always came with elevated heart rates. "I'll call when I land," he said, grabbing his suitcase. "You better," she teased, following him to the door. "And hey, don't forget, we're hosting the Hale Investors Dinner next week. Connor said he'd handle the wine." "Connor." Nathaniel paused for half a heartbeat, then smiled again. "Good," he said. "He's got taste." The name tasted metallic in his mouth. Connor Hale, his old business partner, now rival. The man who once toasted to loyalty before stabbing him in a corporate takeover deal. Nathaniel had forgiven him publicly, or so everyone believed. But forgiveness was never in his nature. Observation was. He stepped into the black sedan waiting outside. The driver closed the door. The car rolled away. From the window, he watched Juliana standing in the doorway. Elegant, beautiful, waving. The picture of a loving wife. 30 minutes later, somewhere along Interstate 495, his phone vibrated. A message from Juliana. He smiled faintly, expecting her usual safe flight. "Love you." Instead, his pupils narrowed. It was a photo. Juliana, in red silk lingerie, biting her lip. Then another. Her on the bed they'd shared. Her body angled, suggestive. The caption read, "He's gone now. 2 days of freedom. I missed every inch of you." Nathaniel's chest tightened, not from shock, but from confirmation. He exhaled slowly, screenshotting every image before she could delete them. 2 minutes later, the pictures vanished, erased remotely. Then the phone rang. "Babe, you boarding yet?" Juliana's voice was light, nervous. "Oh my God, you might see a deleted message. That was a client file. I sent it by mistake." Nathaniel leaned back in the seat, his tone effortless. "Haven't checked my phone yet," he lied. "Oh," she said, forcing a laugh. "Good. Anyway, text when you land, okay?" "Of course," he replied. "Love you." He ended the call and turned to the driver. "Turn around." The driver hesitated. "Sir?" "Back to McLean," Nathaniel said quietly. "But park 2 houses down from mine." The driver obeyed. Night crept over the suburban street. From his car, Nathaniel watched his own house through the windshield. The lights in the living room dimmed. Half an hour later, a silver Mercedes pulled up. Connor Hale stepped out, jacket loosened, grin wide. He rang once. Juliana opened the door. Her robe was already slipping off her shoulder. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but his pulse stayed steady. Rage was noise. Precision was power. He picked up his phone, recording. From that shadowed car, the world saw a betrayed husband. But inside that stillness, a billionaire was being reborn. He whispered into the dark, "You took kindness for weakness, Juliana. Now you'll learn how expensive kindness can be." Rain began to fall, thin and steady, whispering against the windshield as Nathaniel sat in the parked sedan. Through the drizzle-blurred glass, he could see silhouettes moving behind his own curtains. Her laugh, his rival's frame bending toward her. The sound of it reached him faintly through the cracked window, a familiar laugh that used to belong to him. He didn't tremble. He simply watched. Every breath he took came with a calculation. Every second of silence was a ledger entry. When the lights in the bedroom went dark, he leaned forward. "Record this timestamp," he said quietly. The driver nodded, uneasy. "Yes, sir." Nathaniel stepped out of the car and crossed the quiet street, rain soaking his hair, his coat collar turned up. He didn't walk toward the door, he walked toward the mailbox. With surgical calm, he slid a small metallic capsule inside, a tracker. Not to spy on Juliana's messages, he already had those, but to trace every piece of mail, every document, every movement in and out of that house. Evidence had to be legal, revenge had to be admissible in court. He returned to the car, his voice low. "Drive to the office." "Sir, it's midnight." "Exactly." 20 minutes later, the sedan stopped in front of an unmarked building, 3 floors of glass and shadow. The world thought Nathaniel Voss worked there as a mid-level logistics consultant. In truth, the building was a facade. Underneath it sat the control center of Voss Global Holdings, a network of 32 companies hidden beneath shell subsidiaries across 5 countries. His assistant, Evelyn Cross, was already there, pale and sharp-eyed, sipping black coffee as if she never slept. "You called for a midnight audit," she said. "That means something went wrong." He placed the phone on her desk and opened the gallery. 1 swipe, 2. The images filled the screen. Evelyn's lips tightened, but she didn't gasp. She'd known Juliana for years. "I want surveillance wiped from tonight except for the security timestamp between 9:27 and 9:41 p.m., Nathaniel said. "And I want Hale's financials cross-referenced with the transfers from Juliana Voss Marketing." Evelyn typed fast. "If you're planning to sue, I'll need the digital chain, emails, wire confirmations." "This isn't a lawsuit," he interrupted quietly. "It's correctional management." Evelyn looked up, eyes narrowing. "You're not going after him through business arbitration, are you?" "I'm going through everything," he replied. "Corporate, federal, family court. I'm not destroying them in anger. I'm dismantling a system of betrayal, piece by piece." Outside, thunder rolled like distant applause. By 3 a.m., the servers hummed with data extraction. Hale's accounts showed money laundering through a dummy firm in the Caymans, ironically registered using Juliana's initials. She'd helped him without even realizing she'd left fingerprints. Nathaniel stared at the screen. "Prepare affidavits for the Financial Crimes Division. I want it anonymous for now. I'll sign when I'm ready." Evelyn hesitated. "Nate, you sure you want to start this tonight?" He turned to her slowly. "Evelyn, when you see a house on fire, do you wait for morning to pour water?" At 4 a.m., he drove back to McLean. The lights in his house were off now, her betrayal asleep in silk sheets. He didn't go inside. He sat across the street again, the drizzle turning into mist. He thought about his father, the man who had begged his mother for forgiveness after a lifetime of lies. She'd forgiven him, and it had killed her in pieces. Forgiveness, Nathaniel realized, was just another word for slow death. He called his attorney. "Raymond," he said when the groggy voice answered, "file preliminary paperwork for divorce. Use irreconcilable differences as placeholder. Seal it under non-disclosure." The lawyer blinked awake. At this hour? Especially at this hour. When dawn finally broke, Juliana stirred from her bed, stretching beside the man who wasn't her husband. The sunlight cut through the curtains like judgment. Downstairs, the doorbell rang once, then again. Connor cursed, pulling on his pants. She hurried to the window, peering down. A courier stood on the doorstep, holding an envelope embossed with gold lettering. Hale Enterprises, urgent compliance audit. Juliana frowned. Connor swore under his breath. He grabbed the envelope, ripped it open, and froze. Inside was a notice from the Department of Justice, referencing a federal review of his offshore accounts. "Who the hell reported this?" he muttered. Juliana's phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "You chose him. Now live with him." Her hands shook. "Connor," she whispered, "something's wrong." And across the street, Nathaniel watched from behind tinted glass, sipping cold coffee. His first move had landed. The board was open. He whispered, "That was level 1. The rain stopped. The street fell silent. Inside the house, Connor looked up suddenly as if feeling eyes on him. But by the time he stepped outside, the sedan was gone. And so was every trace that Nathaniel Voss had ever lived there. "Excellent. Here's scene 3, 700 words, written in the same cinematic realistic tone, keeping psychological realism, emotional depth, and the high-stakes corporate and marital undercurrent of the story. No subheadings, no summaries, just the story as if playing in front of the camera." Morning light broke across the marble floors of Nathaniel's penthouse office, its silence interrupted only by the low hum of the city below. He hadn't gone home. He hadn't slept. The skyline of Washington, D.C. stretched before him, each skyscraper catching fire in the dawn, like reflections of the empire he secretly owned. On his desk, 2 things sat side by side, a stack of divorce papers and a cold cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, the weight of memory pressing against the glass walls. People thought betrayal came suddenly, a sharp single act, but Nathaniel knew better. It began quietly, like a leak beneath the floorboards, rotting the structure long before it collapses. He remembered their first year of marriage, the night Juliana had called crying, saying her ex had lost his job and needed a loan. He had wired the money without hesitation. She'd said, "You're too kind, Nate. You trust too easily." It was meant as affection, but now in hindsight, it sounded like foreshadowing. Then there was the promotion dinner 2 years later. Connor Hale had been there too, raising a glass to Nathaniel, calling him the most loyal man I know. That night, Juliana's laughter had lingered too long at Connor's jokes. Nathaniel had noticed but dismissed it. A confident man doesn't chase shadows, or maybe, he thought bitterly, a fool doesn't chase truths. He stood and walked toward the window, watching the morning traffic pulse below like a bloodstream of strangers. He remembered his father, Harold Voss, the man who built and lost an empire through the same disease. Misplaced trust. Harold had loved deeply, but loved blindly. He'd forgiven his wife's affair, then forgiven her again when the son she bore didn't share his blood. That second forgiveness broke him. He died a quiet, forgotten man, remembered only by the child who swore he'd never make the same mistake. Nathaniel had kept that promise, until Juliana. He laughed quietly, the sound hollow. He could still see her on their wedding day, standing beneath white roses, promising faithfulness. Her voice trembling not from sincerity but from performance. His mother used to say, "You can hear truth in silence, not in vows." Back then, he didn't understand. Now he did. The door opened. Evelyn Cross stepped in, a folder in her hand. "The forensic accountants just sent this," she said. "It's worse than we thought." He took the folder. Inside were transaction histories, offshore movements, and confidential correspondence between Juliana and Connor. She'd not only stolen from his trust accounts, she'd sold proprietary data from one of his defense subsidiaries to Connor's firm. It was espionage, a federal crime. Evelyn's tone softened. "She's in deep, Nate. If we press this, she could face charges. Prison." He stared at the papers. "I'm not sending her to prison," he said quietly. "I'm sending her to reality." "There's a difference." Evelyn hesitated. "And Hale?" Nathaniel's lips curved faintly. "He'll wish it was prison." She lingered a moment longer, studying his face. "You know you could have exposed them last night, made it public. Why wait?" He met her eyes. "Because humiliation is temporary. I'm building something permanent. When people destroy your image, destroy their foundation, make them question who they are, not just what they did." After she left, he sat back again, staring at his reflection in the glass. He barely recognized the man looking back. Calm, precise, expressionless. A mirror of the father who forgave, and yet not. Nathaniel's kindness had always been deliberate, but this was something new. A silence sharpened into vengeance. His phone buzzed. It was Judge Raymond Hollis, an old acquaintance, now presiding over family and corporate cases in Fairfax County. "Nathaniel," the judge said, "I got your preliminary filing. It's sealed, as you asked. But I have to ask, do you really want to go through with this level of litigation?" Nathaniel looked out again at the city, voice steady. "Your Honor, I'm not litigating. I'm clarifying ownership of my assets, of my life." There was a pause. "You sound like your father," Hollis said softly. "Not anymore," Nathaniel replied and ended the call. The city kept moving, unaware that one man in a glass tower was rewriting every rule that had ever governed his heart. He picked up the divorce file, signed his name in black ink, and laid it beside another folder labeled Project Silence. Inside it were legal drafts, property transfers, and corporate proxies already signed in Juliana's name. She wouldn't know it yet, but by the time the public scandal broke, every asset she believed she controlled would belong to him again. He stood there for a long time, the pen still in his hand, the city light bleeding through the windows. For the first time since the betrayal, he allowed himself to feel something. Not sorrow, not anger, but clarity, the kind that burns cleaner than fire. He whispered to the empty room, "You can't break what's already rebuilt itself." And just then, his phone lit up with a new message from an unknown number. A blurred photo of Juliana and Connor kissing inside his house. The caption read, "You'll never be enough." Nathaniel's eyes darkened. "Perfect," he said quietly. "That makes it public." He dialed Evelyn. "Initiate level 2, he ordered. "And make sure the press gets an anonymous tip about Hale's financial crimes. Let's see how they like the taste of exposure." The morning the story broke, the city woke up to a headline that made phone screens sizzle. Federal probe launched into Hale Enterprises. Offshore transfers linked to Voss-associated accounts. Anchor faces changed from polite to hungry. Social feeds filled with the same grainy photo Nathaniel had recorded from his car. Connor Hale stepping up to Juliana's door, robe slipping, a grin that would soon be archived as arrogance. The anonymous tip had landed exactly where Nathaniel wanted it, in the inboxes of investigative reporters who lived for scandals that smelled like money. At the Hale investors' dinner that evening, the room vibrated with forced cheer. Crystal chandeliers refracted the worry into glittering shards. Connor stood under a dozen cameras, telling the same jokes, the same stories about innovation and disruption. But when his CFO didn't show, a small ripple of alarm went through the crowd. Then a reporter tapped a shoulder, slid a phone across the table, and the ripple became a crash. The DOJ notice played on a loop. Subpoenas, freeze orders, reference numbers. People close to Connor checked their watches. People further away checked their reputations. Juliana's smile started to tremble like a candle in a draft. She'd always relied on optics, on laughter, on the right dress at the right party. But optics don't pay legal fees. They don't stop subpoenas. Connor's hand found hers under the table, squeezing as if pressure could make things whole again. He mouthed something fierce, an assertion of control, then left, ostensibly to handle a PR hiccup. He never returned to the table. Meanwhile, Nathaniel sat at his desk 2 boroughs away, watching everything through a feed Evelyn had arranged. He watched Connor's faces flicker across screens, the bravado, the confusion, the first sparks of fear. He listened to the calls in real time. Hale's lawyer telling him to call an emergency board meeting, a banker freezing transfers, a venture partner publicly distancing. He scribbled notes, methodical and cold. Evelyn walked in with a printed stack, an evidentiary packet that would make any prosecutor salivate. "We've matched 3 transfers from Juliana Voss Marketing to shells linked directly to Hale," she said. One of those transfers was timed to coincide with a series of patent filings Connor's firm made last year. She slid the packet across the desk. "If we file this correctly, we don't just wreck his company, we create criminal exposure for both of them." Nathaniel read the top page and felt the odd, precise satisfaction of a machine functioning as designed. "File the paperwork with the compliance hotline," he said. "Let it go anonymous for now. Simultaneously, contact the custody attorney and start the process for emergency paternity tests. Make sure the chain of custody is ironclad." Evelyn hesitated, a shadow passing her face. "The children," she began. "The children are evidence, not weapons," Nathaniel corrected softly. "But if their paternity is tied to this web, that will determine custody and asset standing in a way a simple divorce cannot. This is level 3 and 4 at once. Financial ruin and social exposure. We must be surgical." Juliana was already feeling the heat. Her social calendar evaporated like sugar in rain. Sponsors pulled out, friends canceled brunches, her PR manager advised damage control and then resigned. The woman who had built an identity around being indispensable suddenly faced the possibility of being disposable. In interviews, she handed out practice lines. "I'm cooperating with authorities. We'll be transparent. I've done nothing illegal." But the camera lenses kept returning to the image of wine on a man's chest and the smear of a public spat. Narrative memory is sticky. Humiliation attaches itself like tar. Connor hired crisis counsel and poured money into PR, but money is only effective until the legal system says otherwise. On a Friday morning, FBI agents executed a small, efficient raid at Hale's Shoreline office. Laptops were bagged. An associate's luxury watch lay on the conference table like a relic. A live stream of the raid cut across the evening shows, pulling the public deeper into the story. Stock slides, investors demanding answers, employees whispering about embezzlement and insured losses. The collapse you engineer for someone else is a slow, terrible law of gravity. At home, Juliana's private messages, once petty and flirtatious, began to be quoted in whispers at cocktail parties. People who had once applauded her now texted with a mix of pity and calculation. Her mother called, her voice strained with the worry of a socialite losing her footing. The call ended with more accusations than comfort. In the quiet hours she paced, the heels of her stilettos clicking like a metronome counting down. She tried to call Nathaniel, begging, bargaining, but the number was a closed loop. His representation said nothing. Nathaniel watched all this and kept his face unreadable. He'd predicted shockwaves, but there was an aesthetic to watching reputations unspool that even he, with his deliberate ethics, had to respect. Still, he had more to plant. He wasn't satisfied with mere ruin. He wanted unraveling that showed causality, paper trails and DNA markers, and legal precedents that would make the humiliation stick and make any attempt at restoration expensive, if not impossible. Late that night, Juliana received a courier envelope delivered to her address with no return name. And inside was a sealed subpoena bearing a court seal and a short typed note, "Immediate paternity hearing requested, urgent DNA testing ordered. Please respond within 72 hours. Her hands went cold. She pressed the paper to her chest as if it could stop the world from moving. She laughed once, a small animal sound, then sobbed. Her empire of appearance had been breached by forensic fact. She looked at herself in the mirror, gold silk, mascara smeared, and for the first time in years, did not recognize the woman reflected back. Far away, Nathaniel closed the laptop, the glow fading from his face. He had ignited the first fire. Now the wind would help spread it. He thought about the 15 levels he'd promised himself. Public exposure, legal ruin, financial collapse, custody stripping, social annihilation, and realized the list had narrowed with the precision of a scalpel. He had started level 2. The calculus had become inevitable. The next morning's papers would carry new words he had been waiting for. Paternity test ordered, temporary custody petition filed. The courtroom doors would open. The theater of retribution was moving into legal performance. And somewhere, a bailiff was preparing to serve a document that would make Juliana's world public in a way she could never stage manage. The courthouse in Fairfax smelled of varnish and tension. Reporters filled the marble lobby like vultures in suits, their cameras pointed toward the mahogany double doors of courtroom 7B. Outside, a single headline scrolled across every news ticker in Virginia. DNA hearing in Hale Voss scandal, billion-dollar secrets exposed. Inside the courtroom, Juliana sat rigid beside her attorney, her jaw trembling despite the flawless makeup she'd applied that morning. Her red lipstick couldn't mask the exhaustion in her eyes. Connor sat 2 seats away, sunglasses hanging from his collar, pretending calm, but his right leg bounced under the table like a man waiting for a sentence he already feared. Nathaniel entered last. The courtroom turned toward him as if gravity had shifted. No entourage, no theatrics, just a charcoal suit, a folded legal folder, and the kind of composure that made even silence sound expensive. The judge adjusted his glasses. "We're here to address paternity confirmation and the asset division implications tied to the Voss marital trust." His voice echoed through the chamber, formal but faintly aware of the circus outside. Juliana's lawyer rose first. "Your Honor, we find the timing of this hearing questionable. The alleged anonymous financial tip and the resulting corporate scandal have clearly influenced public opinion. My client," Judge Hollis raised a hand. "Save it for closing. We're here for facts." He turned toward the clerk. "Proceed with the results." The clerk opened a sealed folder and read from the report, her voice clinical, each word cutting air like a scalpel. "Based on DNA analysis conducted by the federal lab, it is concluded with 99.97% certainty that Mr. Nathaniel Voss is not the biological father of the minors. Sophie Voss and Liam Voss." The courtroom exhaled. Somewhere, a journalist's phone clicked. Juliana froze. Connor's hand dropped from the table. Nathaniel didn't move. He simply blinked once, as if the data had confirmed what he'd already known for years. The judge continued, voice steady. "Mr. Voss, do you wish to amend your asset claim and custody petition based on these findings?" Nathaniel rose slowly. His tone was even, courteous. "No, Your Honor, I don't wish to amend it. I wish to clarify it." Juliana's lawyer frowned. "Clarify?" Nathaniel opened his folder, pulling out documents one by one. "These are notarized records of trust restructuring I executed last year. You'll see the trust name, Voss Global Family Foundation, lists the beneficiaries as children biologically proven to be of my bloodline. Since that is no longer applicable, the entire estate reverts to my holding company." The lawyer's voice cracked. "You mean she gets nothing?" Nathaniel met Juliana's eyes. "She gets honesty. That's more than she ever gave," the audience murmured. Connor leaned forward, whispering something desperate, but Juliana's face stayed vacant, her lipstick trembling at the edges. She whispered back, "You said it would never come out." Nathaniel caught it, his voice low but audible. "It always comes out. Lies just wait for daylight." The judge tapped his pen. "Mr. Voss, as for the minors, are you seeking to relinquish any legal guardianship?" Nathaniel hesitated, a brief, human pause that betrayed the faint ache of memory. Then, "Yes, Your Honor. I wish them well, but they are not my legacy." Gas fluttered through the courtroom. The judge nodded solemnly. "Motion noted." Juliana's hand shot up suddenly. "Your Honor, he's lying. He's doing this to punish me. He's framing us both." Her voice cracked mid-sentence, echoing across the marble. Judge Hollis slammed his gavel once. Mrs. Voss, one more outburst and I'll have you removed. Nathaniel's lawyer, Evelyn, leaned forward. Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to introduce supplemental exhibits. Correspondence between Mrs. Voss and Mr. Hale, showing direct coordination in transferring proprietary data from Voss Logistics to Hale Enterprises in exchange for luxury assets and unreported cash. Juliana's eyes widened. That's not true! But the screen flickered to life as Evelyn connected her laptop to the court display. There, under the sterile light, came the images, emails, voice notes, timestamps. Juliana's voice on playback, laughing, whispering, negotiating terms. The courtroom turned silent except for her own recorded words. Connor buried his face in his hands. Nathaniel stood still, hands clasped behind his back, as if attending a lecture rather than witnessing devastation. Judge Hollis stared for a long moment, then turned toward Juliana. You understand, Mrs. Voss, that this introduces potential criminal exposure for corporate espionage and fraud? Juliana didn't answer. Her voice had broken somewhere between denial and realization. Nathaniel gathered his papers. Your Honor, I request the court seal my private holdings from public release. Let her reputation collapse on its own. I won't need to help it. The judge nodded. Request granted. As Nathaniel turned to leave, Juliana reached out instinctively. Nate, please, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can... He paused just long enough for her to believe mercy was coming. Then, you didn't break our marriage, Juliana. You auctioned it. He walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt carved. Cameras flashed as he stepped outside, expression unreadable. Reporters called his name. One shouted, Mr. Voss, is it true you're still controlling Hale Enterprises' assets? He gave a small, calm smile. Not controlling, he said. Correcting. He got into the black sedan. The door shut with a soft click. Across town, Connor Hale's bank accounts began blinking offline one by one, and Juliana's face appeared on every business news channel, not as a socialite, but as a co-conspirator in a billion-dollar fraud case. Nathaniel stared at the screen, expressionless. Level 5, he murmured. Commence liquidation. Understood. I'll blend both perspectives seamlessly, keeping it cinematic and grounded in realism. Nathaniel's cold precision contrasted against Juliana's crumbling facade and Connor's frantic downfall. Here's Scene 5, 700 words, continuing directly from where Scene 4 ended. The storm that followed the courtroom wasn't of thunder but silence, the kind that ruins reputations faster than sound ever could. Within 48 hours, Hale Enterprises had gone from a $3.8 billion valuation to bankruptcy speculation. The SEC had opened a probe. Partners withdrew, clients demanded refunds. Banks froze lines of credit pending federal clarification. In the center of it all, Connor Hale sat in his glass office, staring at screens flashing red. His assistant's voice quivered through the intercom. Sir, there are reporters downstairs, and, someone from the Department of Justice. He didn't answer. He was busy watching the ticker symbol HLEQ collapse into dust. His empire, his leverage, his illusion was dissolving before lunch. The same hands that once poured wine on another man's chest now shook as he refreshed his portfolio, desperate for any green number that hadn't turned against him. A knock came. A courier entered, placed a sealed envelope on the desk, and left without a word. Connor opened it. Inside was a single legal document bearing the Voss Holdings insignia. Notice of receivership transfer, pursuant to judgment filed under seal. All intellectual property registered under Hale Enterprises shall effective immediately be managed under provisional receivership by Voss Global Holdings, pending review of proprietary data theft and damages exceeding $1.7 billion. Connor's chest went tight. No, he whispered. He wouldn't. He would. Across the river, Nathaniel Voss sat in his private boardroom on the top floor of Voss Tower. The city skyline shimmered below him, every window a mirror of justice. Evelyn Cross stood by his side, phone pressed to her ear. Media's running the story, she said. We didn't have to push. Once the court filing leaked, it became a wildfire. Nathaniel scrolled through his tablet. Financial graphs, email screenshots, court orders, all of it in perfect order. And Juliana? Her accounts are under compliance audit. Her mother's charity account, too. The auditors flag luxury transfers linked to Hale's offshore firm. It's only a matter of hours before the bank seizes her properties for repayment. He nodded slowly. Let it proceed. No interference. I want every action to look procedural. No trace of emotion. Evelyn hesitated. You really don't hate her, do you? Nathaniel looked up. Hate is emotional investment. I don't invest in liabilities. Meanwhile, Juliana's house, once the backdrop of perfect parties, was surrounded by camera crews. She'd drawn the blinds but couldn't block the voices. Juliana, did you know your husband was worth $20 billion? Is it true you lied about your children's paternity? Will you testify against Connor Hale? She pressed her back to the door, breathing shallowly. The silence of luxury felt suffocating when it no longer belonged to her. Her phone rang. It was her mother. They froze my accounts, Juliana. Do you understand? My accounts. Juliana gripped the counter, voice breaking. Mom, please, You've destroyed our name, the woman screamed before the call cut off. Upstairs, her son's bedroom door was slightly open. The innocence of it, the model planes, the photos of Daddy Nathaniel at school fairs, twisted something deep in her chest. She wanted to believe that love could erase genetics, but even she knew Nathaniel too well. He didn't forgive. He documented. Connor arrived that evening, his car dented from paparazzi. He burst into the living room, sweat and panic dripping through his polished mask. We're finished, he spat. You hear me? He's taken everything. He's got the patents, the lawyers, the banks. He's orchestrating this like a symphony of ruin. Juliana stared at him blankly. You said he was harmless. Connor laughed bitterly. He's not harmless. He's mathematical. Outside, floodlights danced against the windows. Inside, Juliana's reflection caught her own face. Mascara bleeding, gold earrings trembling. She whispered, I just wanted more. Yeah? Connor snapped. Now you've got less than nothing. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the chandelier rattled. Across town, Nathaniel watched the same moment on his monitor feed. His private investigator's camera, planted months ago under the pretense of home security, streamed the collapse in perfect 4K. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply noted the timestamp. Evelyn entered quietly. SEC called. They've confirmed criminal proceedings against Hale. They might subpoena Juliana as a cooperating witness. Good, Nathaniel said. Witnesses live longer than criminals. I want her alive long enough to understand consequence. He turned the monitor off, the screen going dark. The reflection staring back at him wasn't the betrayed husband anymore. It was the strategist his father could never be, the man his wife never recognized. He walked to the window, watching rain streak down the glass. Justice isn't revenge, he murmured. It's arithmetic. As he spoke, his phone lit up again. An unknown number. He answered, a woman's voice trembling. Nathaniel, please, Juliana whispered. They're taking everything. I'm begging you. I'll sign whatever you want. Just stop this. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening not to her words, but to the sound of desperation on the same lips that once called him poor. I told you once, he said quietly, kindness is expensive, and you can't afford it anymore. He ended the call. The line went dead. Seconds later, Evelyn's phone buzzed. Her expression changed. Nate, Hale's been arrested, but there's something else. They found falsified insurance documents with Juliana's signature. She's officially under investigation. Nathaniel turned back toward the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like cold fire. Level 7, he said softly. Initiate asset burial. Rain-slick streets reflected a city that had already started to forget the man who'd once been laughed at and spat on. Nathaniel didn't move with vindication so much as with the cold choreography of someone executing a plan he'd rehearsed in daylight and dark. Level 7 had landed. Level 8 would be personal. He began with a call that sounded casual, almost distracted. Hi, Marianne. It's Nate. Juliana's mother picked up on the second ring, voice brittle with nerves. Nathaniel let her talk until she was a trembling wire of gossip and accusation. Then he said, in the same even tone he used for boardrooms and FBI agents, I'm out of town on a business trip. I was on a conference call when I heard a commotion on the line. Juliana screaming, "I thought you should know." He let the words rest there. Not a lie, but not the whole truth either. The goal was not to deceive the public, but to compress the timeline until everyone's memory matched the legal record he'd already begun to write. He hung up and moved on to choreograph the next pieces. Evelyn drafted a tactical motion requesting immediate temporary guardianship for the children under the doctrine of best interest, citing the children's exposure to criminal investigations and the need for stable interim oversight. Simultaneously, his private investigator, Mason Drake, delivered a sealed packet to a family court magistrate. Witness statements from tutors, a daycare provider's log showing nights Juliana returned home late, and unambiguous time-stamped footage of Connor entering the house while school buses were still on the road. The aim was not to humiliate, though humiliation would follow, but to construct an immovable narrative for a judge who valued evidence above spectacle. The media circus fed off every movement. Tabloid headlines screamed about a billionaire's hidden life, while serious outlets ran forensic timelines, an entire industry born from one man's restraint. Juliana's social pages, once curated with manic precision, had become a dossier. Her PR team had fled in the wake of criminal audits. Friends quietly severed ties before subpoenas could drag them into the same mud. In private, Juliana tried bargaining with anyone who would answer. Her mother called lawyers, old donors, anyone with clout. Her pleas turned into threats and then into apologies she couldn't feel. She begged Connor to step up. He offered promises without plans. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office served a temporary restraining order executed at dawn. Someone had complained about late-night parties around minors. The complaint, oddly, came from a neighbor who'd always greeted Juliana with smile and wine glasses, now a carefully placed voice for the record. Nathaniel watched the petitions pile up on his desk like dominoes. He had planned for custody to be litigated, but not in the sensational way it began to play out. A judge in juvenile court scheduling a hearing within 72 hours, social services preparing a provisional placement protocol should emergency removal be necessary. He felt a small, sharp tug of the thing he'd promised not to feel, pity at the children's confusion, then tuned it away. This was law now, not vengeance. The law would enforce consequence. That was his philosophy. On the morning of the emergency hearing, the gallery was packed. Cameras lined the corridors like teeth. Juliana walked in with a face drained of color, clutching a small satchel with school photos and permission slips, the props of a woman trying to manufacture normalcy. Connor sat behind her, hands folded like a man expecting a sinner's sentence. Nathaniel entered last, as ever, immaculate and precise, flanked by his counsel and Evelyn. The magistrate read the affidavits aloud. Unreconciled paternity, financial malfeasance, exposure of minors to ongoing criminal investigations, and a recommendation from family services for supervised visitation. The terms were severe but procedural. No theatrical gavel banging, only the administrative imposition of emergency custody to a court-appointed temporary guardian agency until full hearings could be held. Juliana's lips carved a thin line. Her fingers trembled on the strap of her bag. "Mrs. Voss," the magistrate said, "this court must prioritize the children. Given the ongoing federal investigation connected to Mr. Hale and the financial irregularities involving your accounts, we are ordering temporary custody to the Department of Family Protective Services for placement with an approved guardian until further review." Juliana's knees nearly buckled. "No, no, you can't," she stammered. "They're my children. I care for them." "Ms. Voss," the magistrate replied, voice clinical, "this is not a determination of parental unfitness. It is an emergency safety measure." Outside the courtroom, the click of camera shutters sounded like falling confetti at a funeral. Juliana was allowed a last embrace. She clung to her children as if she could fuse the maternal role back into existence with sheer will. Nathaniel watched from the bench with a face that betrayed nothing but a quick, human exhale when the children were led away. Then a small paper trail of properly executed release forms went to the guardian's office with his name listed as a co-signer for access in emergency medical decisions. He had ensured they would never be stranded without a person of record willing to authorize care. That night, Juliana made one final public attempt for sympathy with a recorded plea. Measured, rehearsed, a woman trying to reclaim narrative control by scripting regret. It did not land. Audiences saw not contrition, but calculation. People who had once envied her life began to interpret her performance as a hostage video. The social bonds she had folded into her identity unstitched themselves in real time. Connor, now a man staggering under the weight of seized assets and indictments, tried to bargain for leniency by offering recordings. Blackmail of old investors, whispered promises. Nathaniel let law enforcement take the leads. The FBI listened politely and then reclassified some of Connor's cooperation as self-serving and irrelevant. The man who had once poured wine now poured apologies nobody accepted. Nathaniel sat alone in his study after the hearing, the house around him a museum of decisions. He had committed to 15 levels of ruin, and yet there remained work. Legal knots to tie, trustees to replace, charitable foundations to redirect so that no asset could be used again as a weapon against him. He opened a ledger labeled restitution and began to list beneficiaries, the organizations that helped veterans his father had betrayed, a scholarship fund in his mother's name, shelters for children affected by crime, gestures that would make the courtroom record read not merely of punishment, but of repair. He tapped a final key on his encrypted device and sent the last set of filings, the ones that would convert Juliana's trust claims into a public restitution fund if she lost. Then he looked up, the lights of the city winking like tally marks. For a moment, he allowed himself the small satisfaction of a plan tracking to outcome. There was a soft knock at the door. Mason entered, face grave, a small envelope on his palm. "You asked to be notified immediately," he said. Nathaniel took the envelope, slid it open, and read a single line that had not been in any of his drafts. He stared, then folded the paper slowly and spoke without emotion. "Level 11, he asked. Mason shook his head. "Not him, someone else. The donor list. There's a name you didn't expect." For the first time in the campaign, Nathaniel felt a ripple of something unplanned, an unknown variable in a system he had assumed closed. He looked toward the window, the city's geometry suddenly less certain. On the paper between his fingers, a single name glowed like a fault line: Vivian Locke. That evening, the city glittered below Nathaniel's penthouse like an obedient grid of light. He held the envelope Mason had given him, its weight somehow heavier than any of the legal filings stacked on his desk. The name Vivian Locke sat in elegant script across the top of the attached trust summary, his late father's handwriting from decades earlier. He read the first page twice before the implication settled. 26 years ago, Harold Voss had named Vivian Locke as the secondary trustee of an unrecorded family account, the same trust Nathaniel had later folded into the invisible web of Voss Global. His father's signature, Vivian's countersignature, and the same Cayman registration number that had recently surfaced in the Hale investigation. Mason stood a respectful distance away. "It means she's been inside the system the whole time," he said. "She helped set up the shell companies that hid your father's money. When he died, she transferred some of those rights to Juliana's early startup funds. Your wife's business wasn't built from scratch. It was financed by your father's ghost." Nathaniel closed the folder slowly. "Which makes this not coincidence," he murmured. "It's inheritance." Images overlapped in his mind. Juliana at 23, radiant, ambitious, telling him her mother had friends in finance. Vivian smiling at their wedding like a queen proud of her own matchmaking. Every gesture, every compliment now looked rehearsed. He poured a drink and didn't touch it. "Get me every archive from the Locke Foundation," he said quietly. "Financial filings, donor lists, anything predating my marriage." By midnight, Evelyn had joined them, tablet glowing with scanned PDFs. "There's something else," she said. "Vivian Locke received quarterly disbursements from the Voss family estate, smaller amounts, hidden as consulting fees. When your mother died, those payments stopped. 2 years later, the same account started funding Hale's first logistics contracts." Nathaniel's pulse didn't quicken. It flattened. "So my father's mistress financed my rival, who seduced my wife." Evelyn hesitated. "We don't have proof of the mistress part." He gave a thin smile. "We will." He asked Mason to dig into old photo archives. An hour later, a grainy image appeared on screen. Harold Voss and Vivian Locke leaving a hotel in Georgetown, 1992. She wore pearls. His father's wedding ring was absent. Nathaniel stared at the picture, the air around him turning colder. It was never about Juliana's ambition, he said. It was succession. Her mother planted her in my life the way my father planted money in hers. Evelyn whispered, "That means the revenge cycle started before you were born." He looked out over the city, its towers blinking like circuitry. "Then it ends with me." At 3 a.m., he called Judge Hollis. "Raymond, I need a sealed ex parte motion," he said. "Reopen the Voss family trust under probate review. There's evidence of fraudulent co-trusteeship tied to Locke Holdings." The judge sighed. "You're dismantling your own father's estate." "I'm disinfecting it." By dawn, subpoenas were drafted. By noon, reporters learned that the Locke Foundation for Women in Business was under federal audit. By evening, Juliana's mother appeared on every financial channel, once the picture of refinement, now cornered behind microphones, denying any role in offshore laundering. In her statement, she slipped. "Harold was a visionary," she said. "Everything I did was to preserve his legacy." Viewers heard it as nostalgia. Nathaniel heard it as confession. He watched the broadcast alone, the glass in his hand catching blue light. The revenge he'd orchestrated so carefully had just turned inside out. It wasn't just retribution for a faithless wife, but the unmasking of a generational lie. The empire his father built and the woman who raised his betrayer were strands of the same web. He dialed Mason. "Find her," he said. "Not for the press, for me." Mason hesitated. "And when I do?" Nathaniel's reflection stared back from the dark window. "I'll ask her what price she put on my mother's name." Hours later, as rain returned, Mason texted a single photo. Vivian stepping into a chauffeured car outside a federal building, face drawn but defiant. The caption read, "Interviewed, released pending further inquiry." Nathaniel enlarged the photo. Behind her, through the blurred glass of the car, sat Juliana, eyes red, hand gripping her mother's wrist. The two women bound by blood and deceit. He exhaled slowly. "So that's where you ran." The city lights flickered once as thunder rolled across the Potomac. Nathaniel set his glass down and whispered to the empty room. "Level 14 begins at dawn. Tonight, I stop inheriting their sins." The courthouse was quieter this time, stripped of television crews and gawkers. Federal proceedings weren't for spectacle. Inside, only the whir of ceiling fans and the soft shuffle of lawyers filled the space. A judge with silver hair adjusted her glasses, looking down at the files stacked high before her. At the front, 3 names were printed on the docket: Nathaniel Voss, Juliana Voss, Vivian Locke. Juliana sat beside her mother, every trace of glamour gone. Her once glossy hair was tied back, her skin pale from weeks of courtrooms and headlines. Vivian, still dignified, sat upright in a gray suit, her pearl earrings a last relic of her former power. Nathaniel entered last, his stride slow, precise, unhurried. He took the seat beside his attorney, folded his hands and waited. The man who had once been mocked in public now carried silence like armor. The judge cleared her throat. "We're convened to finalize the matter of Voss Global Holdings versus Locke Foundation and Associates. Mr. Voss, your counsel has requested the floor to make a statement before judgment. Proceed." Nathaniel stood. His voice was steady, quiet enough that everyone leaned forward to hear. "Your Honor, for 20 years I've carried the Voss name under 2 burdens: my father's secrets and my wife's lies. I thought they were separate. I was wrong." He opened a folder and set an old photograph on the evidence screen. Harold Voss and Vivian Locke leaving a hotel in 1992. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "This," he said, "is where my father's empire began to rot. The same trust that financed my rival, Connor Hale, was co-signed by Mrs. Locke. The same funds that built my wife's first company came from the same account that destroyed my mother." Vivian inhaled sharply but said nothing. Nathaniel continued. "I'm not here for revenge anymore. I'm here to close a loop that's been open since before I could speak. Every lie my father told, every deception my wife inherited, was financed through this." He held up the trust certificate with both signatures, a document that turned love into currency. The judge studied the file, eyes narrowing. Mr. Voss, the court recognizes this as a legally binding disclosure. Are you seeking damages? No, Nathaniel said. Restitution. He turned to the gallery where reporters waited like dormant embers. Every asset reclaimed from these accounts will be converted into the Eleanor Voss Foundation, named after my mother, the woman whose silence paid for all this. The foundation will fund scholarships for women who build instead of manipulate, who rise without deception. Juliana's voice broke the stillness. Why are you doing this? She whispered. You've already won. He looked at her, calm, unreadable. Winning was never the point. Understanding was. You married me to climb, but you never asked what I was building. You inherited your mother's hunger and my father's arrogance. That combination only ends one way. Vivian's jaw clenched. Your father loved me, Nathaniel. Don't turn this into some morality play. Nathaniel met her gaze. He loved the way men love their mistakes, quietly and without courage. I'm not him. He stepped forward, placing the signed deed of transfer on the clerk's desk. As of this morning, the Locke Foundation and its affiliated accounts are legally merged under the Voss estate. All funds will be repurposed. Mrs. Locke, you're free to keep your name, but not my family's shadow. Vivian's composure cracked for the first time. You can't erase history. No, he said, but I can stop financing it. The judge nodded slowly. Mr. Voss, the court recognizes your submission. Judgments in your favor will be filed accordingly. It was done. A gavel struck once, sharp as a closing door. Juliana turned toward him, eyes wet. Nathaniel, was any of it real? He paused. It was once, before it became a transaction. She reached for his hand, but he stepped back, the distance final. I don't hate you, Juliana, he said. You taught me the value of truth, the way fire teaches value to stone. Outside, reporters gathered in the gray afternoon, but Nathaniel didn't stop. He walked past them, past the questions and cameras, until the courthouse disappeared behind the rain. Evelyn was waiting by the car. It's over, she said. He glanced back once. No, it's balanced. As the car pulled away, the city stretched before him. Wet asphalt, towers of glass, a skyline built from compromise and correction. He thought of his mother's quiet kindness, of his father's failures, of Juliana's beauty turned brittle, and understood that revenge had been only a language. What he truly wanted was silence that didn't hurt. Weeks later, the news cycle shifted. The Voss Foundation began issuing its first grants. A reporter described Nathaniel as the man who turned betrayal into philanthropy. He didn't answer interviews. He didn't need to. One evening, he returned to the old house on McLean Street, now emptied, staged for sale. He stood where it had all begun, the doorway where Juliana once waved him goodbye. The air smelled of dust and lilac, the ghost of ordinary love. He touched the wall lightly and smiled. Kindness isn't weakness, he murmured to the quiet house. It's the final lesson. Outside, thunder rolled softly, then faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of rain and a man walking away from everything that had once defined him. As he reached the gate, his phone buzzed. An unknown number again. The message read, Your mother's lawyer requested a meeting. There's another envelope, one Harold Voss never opened.